Now think in your head maybe the size of like a cheese single slice, maybe a post-it note, or a floppy disk, if you know what that is. Right, use that space. Your box doesn't need to look perfect. In fact, we don't want it to. Keep it very light and loose. But that kind of stuff happens, right? This is rough sketching. That's supposed to happen. We're drawing Wally, again, his whole body, but we're also drawing him facing forward, so we need to draw some guidelines. So the first one is going to go right down the middle of our little box, right down the center. Usually you draw the eye line next for a character, but because we're not just drawing his eye or his face, we don't need it. Not for Wally. Instead, we're going to draw in a line that represents the area where all of his like compartments are. Because even though Wally is very high-tech in his own right, he kind of represents more of an old-timey kind of tech. You can see it on his body. All right, lastly, I'm going to go right below the box, give it a little space, and I'm going to draw the ground plane that he's going to stand on the left and right, and draw two more. What you're going to do with these lines is create the tires. We want to break down all of these advanced kind of features into very simple shapes. So his tires for us will look like little rectangles. Now I would describe Wally as a kind of a shy, timid character, and even though he doesn't speak, he just says his name and he makes noises, his mannerisms and his body language will tell you a lot about him. So let's draw these little squares right here in the corners of the bigger one. We want to draw his hands, but we want it to look like he's kind of grasping. Think of them as little boxes, little diamond shapes, clipboards, right on the corners. But the cool thing about Wally is as you build him up, you can then very easily notice or see where you want to lock in your lines. If you've never been here before, locking in is just a fancy way of saying darken it. So for Wally, for example, I like to start from his hands because he's grasping the corners of his body. These shapes here are going to be in front of that box. So in other words, anything behind it or below it, you want to leave it light. Because technically we wouldn't see those lines. You can also go back and lock in the body itself. Now Wally here is a very interesting character because he's from a very interesting movie. The director, Andrew Stanton, actually wanted to kind of dedicate himself to create a silent film. Now obviously this movie isn't entirely silent, the first part of it is, but he wanted to challenge himself to make a captivating movie with captivating characters with no or little to no dialogue. And I feel like he accomplished that, especially with the kind of characters that are in this movie like Wally. Now for this character, he actually studied a lot of the films of a lot of silent movie stars like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Again, just to kind of challenge himself. For us, we're gonna go ahead and worry about now locking in his hands, the box, and also the tires. But to make these things look more like they're supposed to, right now they just look like flat shapes, which is the point, right? This is the first step in our sketching. But for one thing, we can make the tires look more realistic, if you will, by adding in the tread lines. And there's no right or wrong amount. I'd say just draw as many as you can fit. And then when you go back to the other side, they don't need to line up across. If they do, I feel like you get a cool little clean look, but again, not important. Now Wally, again, is pretty advanced for who he is and what he does. In fact, what does Wally do? Does anyone out there know? What's his job? Yeah, he's like looking and sorting through trash, right? He's looking through the earth as we humans left it behind in the movie. Yeah, so he's got an important job. He's got 3 fingers though, but in this view, we're only going to see 2 of them. So I'm going to go right here to the top of the little square and turn it into a little clipboard. By drawing in this little rectangle on the end, this tiny little rectangle. And then right down the middle, I'll kind of split that box in half. Now, Wally here, his voice is actually, he technically has a voice actor. His name is Ben Burtt. And if you're not familiar with that name, Ben Burtt is actually responsible for designing the sound effects in Star Wars. Have you ever heard of that movie? Yeah, he designed the sounds for that film. Pixar actually hired a lot of people to work on this movie. If you don't really know how animation works, the studio has a bunch of employees that do different things. Someone animates, someone designs, colors, things like that. But they actually hired Ben Burtt, obviously, to create the sounds because he did the things for Star Wars. But Pixar also hired the people who made the Apple products. Apple. Yeah, they hired Apple to create Eve. Who was Eve again? His girlfriend, right? His little love interest. Because they wanted Eve to look very different from Wally. Again, Wally, he's as high-tech as he can be, but Eve is represents the futuristic side of, and they wanted Eve to look very sleek and slender, which Apple is very good at doing. All right, we've got the hands, the box, and the tires. We'll come back to the box in a moment, but I want to add in his eyes now. Now, the way that his eyes look are actually based off of the fact that the director, Andrew Stanton, was at I think a baseball game, some sort of sport event. And he was very fixated on the fact that people watch the game through the lenses of binoculars. So as he was looking around, everybody was kind of standing like this. They all had that same eye. And that image kind of stayed with him. So for us, we're going to go to the top of our guideline and draw in what kind of looks like an arrow pointing up, or an umbrella. So fixated on this image of people holding up binoculars that it inspired him to create the look for Wall-E. To him, it looked like a pair of eyes. For Wall-E, though, you want to start with an umbrella shape here, an arrow. But he's got two separate lenses. So I'm going to go to the corner here. I'm going to lock in or add in a letter U, but even though the arrow up top connects, I want my letter U shapes to not connect. I want there to be a space between. In my opinion, yes, his mannerisms and the way that he moves with his body tells you a lot about his personality, but honestly, when you look at those eyes, they make him look very sad and very timid right away, right? That's the power visually of how character design can work. The way character looks visually should often tell you a lot about them without them even speaking. And again, Wall-E really doesn't speak. Again, he does make some noises, but you can very easily tell his personality. And compared to Eve, Eve appears very strong, very confident. I'm going to lock in the letter U's separate from one another and then connect them in the middle. Now in the film, I feel like these Pixar movies, Disney movies get more and more detailed every time a new one comes out. Connect them here in the middle, but follow your center guideline to bring down the rod that connects those cameras, because he's able to retract and extend his neck. Now his eyes, again, are camera lenses, so they're just circles that sit in the corner. But again, if maybe he's your favorite character, you can draw hearts or stars, maybe a planet, or maybe he's looking at Eve, you can draw little Eve silhouettes. But you actually want to draw his eyes a little closer to the more narrow part of the letter U. If you draw them too low, his eyes tend to look a little droopy, but this is your sketch. If you want to draw them and put them there, of course you can. But his eyes kind of sit in the little corner here, they're very tight. You draw another circle on the inside. If these were eyes, this would be the highlight that even we get in our eyes. For the camera lenses, it could be the shine, right, of the light reflecting that he's around it. Alright, similarly to the tires, you can add in these little lines, again to represent that this does extend. And to get extra fancy, you can even draw a rectangle right here at the bottom, so it looks like it can retract and pull in there. Alright, now Wall-E here, again, having a very important job to do, as you mentioned, all of the information that Wall-E needs to function, you can actually find on himself, right, on the box. The information on the left, because his hand is kind of covering it, to keep it simple, I like to just draw a bunch of rectangles. I like to make one a little longer, maybe one a little shorter. Up to you how you want to do it. If we zoomed in, this would very obviously show a lot of information, maybe some numbers. However, on the right side, there's a little bit more of an important box that we definitely need to add. So I'm going to draw a tiny little square, because Wall-E is actually powered by something specific, right? What powers Wall-E? The sun, yeah, he's solar powered. So you want to draw a box and then split it in half. And on this tiny one, you want to draw a little sun. Over here though, because his hand is kind of covering it, we'll just copy the same thing on the other side. Just draw a bunch of information. Lastly, Wall-E, his name actually stands for something. Does anyone out there know what? Yeah, someone said it. It's waste allocation, load lifter, and then he works on Earth, so he's an Earth class. Wall-E, but you want the E to be in a circle. Yeah, wow. From here, you can add in anything that you want. I personally like to add in his little cockroach. Does anyone remember what his name is? Or does anyone know? Oh, his name is Hal. Yeah, based off of Hal Roach. And I feel like Pixar did the unthinkable and made us fall in love with a cockroach, right? I don't think that's ever going to happen ever again. Now, what I also like to do is use this out of my pencil to get the kind of thick part of the lead. And I like to draw little mounds so it looks like he's standing on dirt or trash, whatever. Because from here, anything that you add is extra credit, except for the fact that you've got to sign your sketches now. Sign your drawings.